February 2nd, 2024. The United States conducted airstrikes in Syria and Iraq, targeting approximately 85 targets being utilized by Iranian-backed Shia militias and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds force. The attacks by the United States come less than a week after a suicide drone attack hit the U.S. Tower 22 base in Jordan, killing 3 American soldiers and wounding 47 others. In this video, I plan to examine the timeline of attacks on U.S. forces since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war that culminated in the deadliest attack yet on Tower 22. I'll also look at the strikes conducted on February 2nd and where things go from here as the Middle East inches ever closer to a broader conflict. The U.S. currently has around 45,000 troops based in the Middle East. This does not include the USS Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group and the myriad of other U.S. naval assets in the region. Of these, 900 are based in Syria, 2,500 in Iraq, and nearly 3,000 in Jordan. Since October 17, 2023, just 10 days after the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war, Iranian-backed Shia militias began launching attacks on U.S. forces based in Iraq and Syria. To date, nearly 170 individual attacks have been conducted, though most have been intercepted or failed to reach their targets entirely. The militias targeting the U.S. are numerous, and most fall under a few umbrella organizations. The 13th Brigade of the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces is known to have been one of the Shia militias in Iraq to target the U.S. The Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF, is an umbrella organization for approximately 67 separate militias in Iraq. Many of these are Shia and are backed by Iran. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq is another Shia militia umbrella group comprising 4 Iran-backed militias, including Hezbollah-linked groups. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq is responsible for the majority of attacks on U.S. forces. This map from the Department of Defense illustrates the volume of the attacks on U.S. personnel in the region. The attacks have been conducted using various means, but the most common method was via suicide drones supplied by Iran, but ballistic missiles have also been used to attack U.S. forces. While most failed to hit their target or cause any damage, those that did caused 83 non-fatal injuries to U.S. personnel. Most were classified as traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs, the most common being concussions suffered from blast injuries. While concussions may seem mundane, they certainly can be serious, especially when looking at the severity of injuries that explosions can create internally. In addition to these TBIs, there are reports of more serious injuries to U.S. troops. In addition to personnel casualties, a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone was also shot down on January 18th. The U.S. didn't sit on their hands as these attacks took place. The U.S. conducted retaliatory airstrikes on 9 separate occasions. These strikes were extremely limited in nature, usually only attacking a single-digit number of targets. These strikes killed approximately 55 militiamen from the various militias that have been targeting U.S. troops. It's important to note that these strikes did not target Iranian forces. On January 28th, a suicide drone launched by the Islamic Resistance in Iraq struck the Tower 22 base in Jordan. While the exact reason the drone was able to get past U.S. defenses is unknown, it's believed that it was mistaken for a U.S. drone that was expected to be returning to the base. Regardless, the drone broke through and struck a tent housing U.S. soldiers. 3 Americans were killed from the 718th Engineer Company based out of Georgia. They were Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Specialist Brianna Moffett. 47 others were wounded, including 8 that required evacuation due to the severity of their injuries. The attack caused the first fatalities and the largest total number of casualties since these Iran-backed militias began their harassment campaign that has now left 3 Americans dead and approximately 130 wounded. This leads us to the retaliatory strikes of February 2nd in response to the Tower 22 attack. Per U.S. Central Command, at approximately 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the U.S. conducted airstrikes against the Iranian Quds force and the various Iran-backed militias. They hit 85 different targets at 7 different sites, 4 in Syria and 3 in Iraq. This is the first time the U.S. has directly attacked Iranian forces. The targets hit command and control operations centers, intelligence centers, rocket, missile, and unmanned aerial vehicle storages, and logistics and munition supply chain facilities. The strikes are reported to have successfully destroyed all their targets, and there is video evidence to back up the claim. No U.S. losses were reported, and the casualties among Iranian and militia forces are unknown as of the making of this video. There are rumors that this is the beginning of a sustained effort to deter further attacks on U.S. forces, but only time will tell. It's also important to note that no targets inside Iran were struck. The strikes represent a major escalation in the region, as the U.S. has now directly targeted Iranian personnel. Taken as a whole, the Middle East seems to be approaching a tipping point. I've made numerous videos on the ongoing crisis in the Red Sea as Houthi forces continue to attack commercial shipping at the direction of Iran. The killing of 3 U.S. soldiers has raised the stakes and resulted in a more direct confrontation between the U.S. and Iran. The current tensions seem to be a classic case of brinkmanship between Iran and the United States, with Iran pushing the U.S. further and further to gauge our reaction. While it's impossible to know the end result of this crisis, I don't believe a war between the U.S. and Iran is likely, nor is a war between Israel and Iran likely either. Iran has little to gain from a direct confrontation with the United States, and any war between Iran and Israel will see U.S. involvement in some fashion. Iran is, and likely will remain, content to use their proxies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine to continue to do the fighting for them. It requires minimal financial investment and minimal direct involvement from Iran, though Israel has conducted strikes in Syria and Lebanon targeting Iranian commanders. As long as the cost to Iran remains low, they will continue to use their proxies to harass U.S. forces in the region. Using low-cost weapons, they force the U.S. to expend its armaments to defend its ships and bases throughout the region. Iran has also provoked the U.S. into a limited campaign against Houthi forces in Yemen, and now in Syria and Iraq as well, though the U.S. has now directly targeted Iranian forces in the latter. Iran hopes to expand its influence in the region and has been successful in the last decade, having Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, the Assad regime in Syria, and the Iraqi government well within their sphere of influence. While the future is uncertain, I hope that my prediction is correct and that there is no large-scale conflict between the U.S. and Iran. It would be devastating to both nations and the region as a whole. I'll continue to monitor developments in the region, but until then, I'll see you on the next one.